Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. It's been 1 year, 3 months, and 7 days since this war began. We are recording on the morning Eastern Standard Time of January 14, 2025. I'm not on Eastern Standard Time. I'm Gadi in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Mike Duran in Eastern Standard Time in Washington, D.C.
Indeed you are, and we are as
sane as possible under the circumstances.
That was great. We should rehearse it a little more. So we have a lot on our plate today with the hostage deal, of course, topping the news. We will discuss it in detail. Is this something to celebrate or is it not? We will also discuss Donald Trump's retweet of Jeffrey Sachs, which is causing some concern in Israel and elsewhere. And then we have a few interesting pieces of news that are domestic issues of Israel. One is a small drama in the parliament, which promises change. And then there are embarrassing details about the incoming Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court. So embarrassing that they might be a problem for him in the how do you say assuming the role that he's about to assume. That's not a good way to phrase it. Mike, help me here.
I want to know if the embarrassing details are salacious. Are they salacious?
No, they're not.
Oh, too bad. Okay, all right.
So how would you phrase it and say that might be a problem for his nomination?
For him assuming his power, I don't know.
Before he could assume power. So we will tell you about that in a minute. But first, Mike, over to you with the news bulletin.
Thanks, Gadi. So as you mentioned, Israel and Hamas are finalizing the terms of a ceasefire deal, which could be announced as early as today, Tuesday. Negotiators, including Steve Witkoff, that's Donald Trump's designated Middle East envoy, are meeting today in Qatar to finalize the draft of a deal. Negotiators from Israel and Hamas are sitting in the same location, but not in the same room. They exchange messages via mediators. Based on previous proposals discussed in May and July, the deal reportedly entails a 3-stage ceasefire in which Israeli troops will gradually withdraw from Gaza and Hamas will release hostages in exchange for Palestinians jailed in Israel. The first phase of the ceasefire will last roughly 6 weeks. During that time, Hamas will release 33 named hostages, most of whom Israel believes are alive. Israel is willing to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange, but the number that Israel will release will depend on how many of the hostages are actually alive. On Sunday night, Gadi, the IDF struck multiple targets in Lebanon, despite the ongoing ceasefire with Hezbollah. The military stated that among the targets were, quote, routes along the Syrian-Lebanon border used to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah. Houthis are still attacking Israel. Gadi, last night, the Houthis from Yemen fired a missile. It appears to have been intercepted by Israel. I've seen no reports of impact. This is the third attack on Israel out of Yemen within the space of 24 hours.
You don't have to speak to me about that, Mike. I was woken up at 3 a.m. and rushed down to the shelter.
They're very inconsiderate about the timing of these.
It's a really bad timing. Bad timing.
Although I'm always awake at 3 a.m. I'm at that stage in a man's life when I don't sleep through the night, and there's always that hour from 3 to 4 where I sit and worry about all the things that I did wrong.
As John Cleese said, 70 is the new 50, but 9 p.m. is the new midnight.
It's a good one. Finally, and we're still in the news here, Gadi. In a blow to opposition leader Yair Lapid, former Deputy Prime Minister Idan Rol announced on Sunday that he was leaving Lapid's party. I'm sure you have something to say about this, Gadi. Leaving Lapid's party, Yesh Atid, and forming his own party, Harov Aleomi. Harov, the national majority. The national majority has one person in it.
That's a start. That's
Yeah,
a start.
you got to start somewhere. Okay, Gadi, back to you.
Lapid is now at about 8 seats in the polls, and he also shouted in one demonstration, "We are the majority. They want a war, they will get a war." To which Netanyahu responded in the parliament, "Who are you fighting a war against? Are you fighting against your own people while we are engaged in a war with the Iranian axis of evil?" Yeah, but the hostage deal, Mike, people are very worried here because it seems that there is not much of a difference between what Biden tried to force the Israeli government to do and what Trump may have succeeded in forcing the Israeli government to do.
I think there's no difference. Anthony Blinken came out and praised Steve Witkoff, the special envoy. The two teams have been working together, which, by the way, itself is remarkable, given the way that the Democrats froze Trump out of anything during the transition in 2017. And
Michael Flynn is probably sitting at home and saying,
yeah, how come I didn't get this deal?
I can't believe this.
I get
The Logan Act. Where is the Logan Act?
But they've been working. Witkoff is actually, as I just said, he's been in Qatar, actually sitting in the room, carrying out the negotiations, working closely with the Biden team. But what that means is, Trump made this statement: they'll be held to pay if there isn't a deal. But in order to get the deal while working with the Biden team, he effectively endorsed the Biden plan. And so what we're seeing is the final fruition of the Biden plan. Hamas appears to have simply held out and is getting the terms more or less. It seems we'll have to wait to see the final terms of the deal. But Hamas is getting more or less what it has always demanded. I don't see any major, so far in the reports, I don't see any major concessions from Hamas. So in answer to your question, no, this is not a, this, I don't think this is a great deal for Israel. But I'm not overly concerned about it.
So you'll have to explain that. One caveat to your suggestion that it's the same deal is that as far as we can tell by reports in the press, they're notoriously unreliable. But so far as we know, it does not include a commitment in the first stage to ending the war. And most probably, and this is in some Israeli statement, Israel will not give up the aims of the war. That means that somewhere, probably in the second stage or the third stage, Israel will have an out, which it may want to exploit.
That is exactly what I am expecting. I think that the only I wouldn't get too worked up about the overall framework. It's not good. Don't get me wrong. This is everything that we ever said was wrong with the Biden approach is wrong with this deal. People on my side of the aisle, that is the Republican side, are inclined to laud this as an incredible achievement, a sign of the stature, the strength, the insight of Donald Trump. That's what the politics requires us to do at this stage. But I don't see it that way personally. Just as we're saying, this is just Trump using the prestige of his election to endorse the deal of that Biden had been working on. But as you say, I think there's all that matters here really is stage one. We're never going to get to stage two or stage three. Just like in the case of in the north with Lebanon, we're never going to get to the end of that deal either. Events are going to overtake it, and we're going to have a new negotiation somewhere in the future after some new round of fighting.
So I think there are two issues there on both sides that are basically that have to do with the personas and the maybe the egos more than they have to do with the content. First, Trump made a huge commitment and he wants to make good on his word that before he even enters the White House, there is a deal. So he is committed to that. And secondly, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is unlikely to pick a fight with Donald Trump even before he enters the White House. So there is a situation what he could do vis-a-vis a hostile administration, he can't do vis-a-vis a friendly administration.
Yeah, exactly. He can't. I mean, it would be unwise. It'd be supremely unwise. The number one thing on Netanyahu's mind right now is Iran, and he wants to come to an agreement with Donald Trump about destroying Iran's nuclear program. He doesn't want to take any step right now that is going to spoil relations with Trump and get in the way of that strategic goal. So I imagine that in Netanyahu's mind right now, he's thinking the history will judge the value of this ceasefire deal with Hamas according to what happens in the future. This is exactly what you and I said, or at least what I said to you. I don't remember what you said to me because I only listen when I'm talking. About the deal in Lebanon. That you remember you were uncomfortable with the Hezbollah deal in Lebanon, and I said this will be judged by what happens later. If we end up taking out if the Israelis end up taking out the Iranian nuclear program, or the Americans and the Israelis together do that, then all of the things that are looming very large in our minds right now will seem a lot less significant.
But you seem to assume there is a trade-off that we will give up something in Gaza in order to gain something in Iran, and some people here are worried that this is just an indication of what Trump plans for the other arenas too, because now he has an envoy for Lebanon, right? And
yes.
and also there are rumors here that negotiations with Iran is underway. So people are trying to connect the dots and see the rising trend in MAGA, which is the isolationist mode, and then Israelis are worried that maybe Trump is going to try to find an accommodation with Iran and its proxies, especially that there have been statements coming out of Iran saying some of them are, Iranians are audacious. They're unbelievable in that. So that was a deputy minister of foreign affairs, I think, who said on some interview, "What proxies? We don't have any proxies in the Middle East. Everyone can do whatever they like, and we are not picking a war with Israel. We don't want a war." So suddenly, they haven't thrown the largest barrage of rockets and drones in the history of warfare on Israel, and they're because they're so audacious, they're very flexible. They can completely change overnight, as dictatorships can, and Trump can go the same route that he went with Kim Jong-un. First, he waved the sabers. How do you say? You have an idiom for that. Rattle the saber. Right?
Oh, saber rattling. Yeah, rattle the saber.
Saber rattling. Good. Yeah. So first he announced that he has.
I thought you were saying sabra. I thought you were rattling the native-born Israelis.
One of those. The problem is it's one of those words I always read but never hear, so I don't know how to pronounce it. So saber rattling, you're saying?
Yeah, I remember in high school, the whole class laughed at me when I said inevitable.
Yeah. At least I understood what the mistake was. That's an advanced class for English speakers. So what first he rattled the saber apparently. It somehow reminds me of Star Wars because of the lightsaber.
Okay, now I have to tell you, some people like these stupid stories and some people don't. So this is for the people who do. I once had a nephew who was fighting with his brother, and he kept calling. He'd gotten for Christmas a Star Wars lightsaber, and he kept calling it a lightsaber. And I said, I told him it's not a saber, it's a saber. And he started arguing with me, and the argument went on for about 5 minutes. And then I realized at a certain point I was arguing with a 5-year-old. This is really a mistake. Anyway, go ahead.
Do you often feel that way in our podcast, Mike?
Never, Gadi, never. I always feel that I'm with a near peer.
No, I thought, do you feel as a 5-year-old? And then maybe I should be more. Uh, so anyway, it started with Donald Trump saying to Kim Jong Un that his rocket is bigger, Trump's, and then he said we get along fine and reach. So this is very Trumpian, right? To make big threats as a move in negotiations. Are we going to see what he's now imposing the Biden doctrine on the hostage deal? Is he going to impose the JCPOA in a new variation on Iran?
Look, I think we should have a separate discussion about this in a few minutes when we talk about the Jeffrey Sachs tweet, because but about his general approach. But the simple answer to your question is, I wouldn't read too much into this. Trump put out a tweet, and he said, "I'm coming in. I'm stronger than the predecessor. I'm going to bring
Part
peace."
of the deal.
Yeah, art of the deal. I'm a deal maker. I'm powerful, and people better listen to me. And so then everyone has worked to make this happen. The Biden team saw an opportunity to cut the deal before Trump came in, and so they can claim credit for it. A lot of people are going to claim credit for it, but it's just everybody mobilizing behind this statement that Trump made without, I think, a lot of consideration about Middle East strategy more broadly. We still don't know what the larger strategic vision of the Trump administration is going to be. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I wouldn't get too worked up about this. And under the circumstances, at the moment, like I said, every Republican has to say, "Oh, this is strategic genius. This is look at the prestige of Trump," and so on. We have to say it's a fantastic thing. I don't think it's a fantastic thing, but I don't think it's the portent of something really ominous either.
So the right wing here thinks it's really ominous, and there are a few aspects to that. One is that many on the right, myself included, think that the proper outcome for this war in Gaza is the annexation of the top third, the north third of the Gaza Strip. From what we know about Hamas theology and Muslim Brother theology, the one thing that should stop you from waging jihad is if there is a risk of losing land. And that should be a price exacted. We in the West don't appreciate the fact that deaths don't count that much in the Hamas theology. They're all shaheeds, martyrs. Martyrs, I'm pronouncing that word right, finally.
Yeah, did a good job.
And so they're going to heaven. And then there's all the destruction of houses, which will just foreign money will come in, and there'll be a lot of new jobs in the construction business in Gaza. So the one thing that they're really worried about is losing land, and that is exactly the price that we should exact. What happened to the old way of waging wars, in which if you start a war, you lose something at the end of it? You don't get everything back. And so that's one ambition that the right has that may become impossible if the population is returned to the north of Gaza, which is more or less empty at the moment. That's one concern. The second concern is that we know from previous hostage deals that about 80% of the people released in hostage deals, I mean the Palestinian terrorists held in Israeli jails, go back to terrorism and then kill many. And we know that Yahya Sinwar was released in one such hostage deal. So that's another major concern. And the right is saying you are risking future death of your own citizens. They're saying to the government and specifically to the prime minister. And thirdly, which to my mind is the most worrying, we have convinced our enemies that the way to make Israel surrender is kidnapping hostages. I am extremely worried that instead of working on nuclear bombs, what they will endeavor to do is kidnap Israelis anywhere. Imagine that they get hold of, I don't know, a cruise ship with 2,000 Israelis. That's the doomsday weapon. And we have, instead of, you remember Entebbe, and the Entebbe operation in 19 76, the Rabin government of the 70s said, we do not negotiate with terrorists. You're holding our hostages. You're threatening to kill them. We do not release terrorists for hostages. This is the way to prevent future the future taking of more hostages. And if you convince the enemy that you will surrender in a war, that they can stop a war by taking hostages, that is a very dangerous lesson.
I have a different view of all this. I think the Israeli goal shouldn't be territory. It should be destroying Hamas as a political organization. It is basically all but destroyed Hamas as a serious military threat, but it has not begun to really dismantle it as a political organization. The United States has held
one comment before you continue, Mike. That does not say that we should go. I did not say that we should go out of the rest of the Gaza Strip. There should be a military occupation there until we dismantle fully the Hamas organization. And to my mind, it's going to take years. So yeah. we need to administer that territory, and least of all, bring the Palestinian Authority into it.
So for reasons that we don't know, the Netanyahu government has decided not to become the occupying power. It wants overall security control of Gaza without becoming the occupying power, but only Israel will actually dismantle Hamas as the ruling political institution or ruling authority.
We have to stay. There's no other way.
But you have to actually separate Hamas from the population, which you haven't done, which the Israelis haven't done. I'm not blaming anyone. I just don't know what the calculations were. I can start speculating, but until that's done, you have this problem that Hamas is still there, still negotiating, still has its representatives in Qatar, and there's no alternative to it. A couple of times the Israelis started to try to inspire alternatives to Hamas, and Hamas quickly killed them. So they had no security. The idea that in some circles that the Saudis or the Emiratis or some mix of these groups is going to come in and dismantle Hamas is a pipe dream. Only Israel can do it, and Israel hasn't started doing it, and I don't exactly know why.
So I think your assessment of what the Netanyahu government is trying to do is mistaken, because although it is not declaring that it will occupy Gaza, that's not wise. I think that is what the default conclusion is, because as you say, there is no other power. Netanyahu, if anything, thinks that the Palestinian Authority is the least fit organization to take control of the Gaza Strip. We now know that despite all the peace processors' dreams about the Palestinian Authority somehow being revitalized or becoming more moderate, these are all pipe dreams too. And so the only alternative is an undeclared occupation, or so I think. Indeed, so I hope.
No, I think it has to be a declared occupation, because Israel has to actually weed out Hamas from the non-Hamas population, and it has to strengthen and support an alternative ruling body, and no one else can do that but Israel.
Yeah, but you keep going back to the alternative governing body. I think that there is no alternative governing body, that we will have to govern, and that is not a wise idea to declare. Although I did, because I was interviewed in the beginning of the war by the Wall Street Journal, and the guy kept pushing me about what's your plan for the day after? That was once the big buzzword. And finally I said occupation. I think I called you after that.
I remember that. Yeah,
that was a really stupid thing to say. Yeah. But that's actually what I believe. I don't think there is an alternative, and I think we need to get used to the idea. I'm not saying occupation is the permanent solution forever and ever, but I also don't think that 1 year of occupation is going to enable us to weed out Hamas. I'm less optimistic than you are about separating Hamas from the population, because Hamas is the population. They voted for Hamas. They cheered the massacre. Hamas is embedded in every organization. I just had the numbers about UNRWA. UNRWA is supposedly a human rights organization, right? It's a UN organization. It's supposedly to take the relief and work authority for the Palestinian refugees. So they're not refugees in Gaza anymore, but also among UNRWA's employees, there are 12,970 or 790, I don't remember, 12,000 of which are either members of the Hamas organization or married to them. So UNRWA is totally Hamas through and through, and these are the people who run everything in the city.
But there's Hamas and there's Hamas. I'm talking about
the good Hamas and the bad Hamas.
No, there's people who just want to get along with their lives, and then there are people who are actually dedicated to going and killing Jews, and in the situation right now. There's no if you're somebody who just wants to get along with your life, take care of your family, make some money, you have no way to do that without pledging allegiance to Hamas.
I strongly disagree. We keep imagining them in our own image, and so we drift without telling ourselves to the Obama view that everyone in the end wants to put food on the table, have a good job, and a secure environment to bring their children. And we don't take into account that this is a very different culture. It's very religious, and that is and that people who say that they are happy to have their children martyred are not lying. And so I think, Mike, that you are underestimating the role of religion in this conflict. I know this.
I think I have a pretty good idea of how it all works. To be honest with you,
what works?
I don't think I'm naive. I think I've spent a lot of time in Arab countries talking to Arabs about how they see things. Historically, in the Middle East, the state is a realm unto itself, and everybody else doesn't get involved in it. And that's if you're an Arab from Gaza, that's been your experience forever. But they're not. These are not democratic societies. Iraq, Syria, the Palestinians, Lebanon. These are not. The politics doesn't flow from the bottom up. It flows from the top down. And this is it's a mistake to analyze it from religious text to behavior of the state.
But it's not a mistake to analyze it from school books, and school books and kindergarten education begins with the inculcating in children at the highest.
Which is why Israel has to actually occupy, create another ruling authority, actually examine the books, make sure that the books are being taught in a certain way. This is all doable, but the decision has to be made to do it. And the idea that somebody else will come in and do it for Israel is a mistake.
We have no argument about that. But we do have an argument about the depth of the Hamas philosophy and how embedded it is in the population. I'll tell you this: denazification of Germany was much easier than de-Hamasization of Gaza. It's going to be much more difficult because these people in Gaza, the actual Hamas terrorists who indoctrinated them, not Hamas. They grew up in UNRWA schools. What kind of books do they have in UNRWA schools? The books written by the Palestinian Authority. And when even in your grammar class, the teacher shows you how to put the diacritics, you call them, on the Arab letters, the dots and the
diacritical marks?
The diacritical marks, thank you. Then the sentence that they use, for example, I think I mentioned this in one of our shows, is never assume that the occupiers are human. So this is drilled into you from infancy, where I don't know if you saw these kindergarten plays. Then, and what I'm saying is not that they are genetically different. I'm saying that this culture has been drilled into young minds for a generation. The people who are able to slaughter a whole family with a kitchen knife have been indoctrinated very deeply, because if you cannot commit such horrors without great deep conviction, and remember that the population cheered those, they broadcasted this on social media because they were proud of it, because they knew that the population will applaud them. So, Mike, it is not a question of just changing the organization. It is a question of instilling an occupation, completely changing all curriculums, supervising what imams say in mosques.
Yeah, I don't think we're disagreeing. It's a huge task, but I'm saying, when does it begin? Who's going to do it?
Israel.
When are they going to do it?
In the
aftermath
of the collapse of the hostage, the second stage of the hostage deal.
Yeah, where's the plan to do it? I'm not. By the way, I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing because I don't. I'm saying there's a story here that hasn't been told, which is, what is the Israeli government's actual plan for the day after?
Oh,
right. I never agreed that with the Biden administration and its pressure on Israel to answer the question, what about the day after? Because the Biden administration raised that question with the answer that it was asserting. There was only one answer: revitalize Palestinian Authority. That is clearly not an answer. It's not realistic. But the question is actually a serious question, and it needs to be answered. I understand one of the reasons why the Netanyahu government never answered it is because it didn't want to argue with the Biden administration about it at that time. That's one of the reasons. It probably also didn't want to argue with itself internally. But it is a question that has to be answered. Somebody has to have an idea. And if you'd asked me shortly after October 7th, if this war had gone on for over a year and Israel had occupied most of the Gaza Strip militarily, would we see by that time the emergence of some kind of alternative political order in Gaza? I would have said yes, and we haven't seen it.
We haven't seen it because I don't think it's possible. And also, the government, first of all, it didn't want to say to the Biden administration what I think it thinks. And this is, the government can't behave like Gadi losing his patience with a Wall Street Journal journalist. You can't just say occupation, that's going to be our plan. So exactly. Of course it can't say something like that. But also there's been a great controversy here. The army under Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi is dovish, and these people are peace processors at heart. And they have been echoing the Biden administration demand and saying, "Oh, we can't plan the war if we don't know what the political goal is." And
but you know what else they're saying? They're saying we can't assume responsibility for the civilian population.
Yeah.
We don't have the troops. We don't have the resources.
So you understand. So exactly. So you understand what they're trying to do. They are trying to sabotage an occupation, and this accounts for the many times we have to return to areas already occupied by the IDF.
Yeah, sure. So, but what is the intelligent, sophisticated, right-wing response to the revitalized Palestinian Authority assuming control? And I don't see it. It's not. Hasn't been. Nobody has articulated it. And so that's all I'm saying.
Because there is no alternative. So that is why the same game continues. The same game continues because we still can't say that the occupation is what Israel should aim for.
All right. We've exhausted this, I think. I want to end. I want to back to this question. I think you put too much emphasis on ideology. I want to give you an example to think about. The government of Saudi Arabia, up until Mohammed bin Salman became the decider, the crown prince, but he's effectively the ruler of the country, there was this Wahhabi Saudi Family Alliance, and all the schools were teaching this jihadi crap. And then on a dime, he turned and he started down a nationalist line. Instead of seeing Saudi Arabia as a bastion of true Islam, he started depicting it as a nation state. It's a major ideological project. Where's all the rebellion? Where are all the jihadis against nationalism? You don't see them.
I don't know about Saudi Arabia, but
they were all indoctrinated. All those kids were indoctrinated with all this jihadi crap. Sure.
But I don't think they have a concrete alternative like the Palestinians do. Anyway, this is a continuing point of disagreement, and had I had more knowledge of Turkey, I would have argued that point there along with Dan Shiftan. Is that I give more you're right that I give more emphasis to ideology and especially to theology than you do, which is ironic because my instructor in my PhD thesis kept saying you will not understand America so long as you don't give enough weight to Protestantism. However, you are a Catholic, so you probably don't understand America either. So we're even. Let's go to the next topic, Mike, because you do understand the American right. And Trump retweeted Jeffrey Sachs. What was the tweet? Let's lay out the whole thing from the beginning.
The tweet was that it was from I'm trying to pull it up here. I have it here. It was from an Oxford or was it Cambridge Union? Anyway, an appearance by Sachs in Britain, where he, in an interview, called Netanyahu a dark SOB and accused him of dragging the U.S. into wars in the Middle East. And Trump retweeted this on his not on Twitter, but on Truth Social. A couple words about Sachs. Sachs is a very clever guy who is basically presenting the wars the United States is in Ukraine, or the wars in the world today, in the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, as completely avoidable wars that are being fueled by the American neoconservatives, globalists. And he has been embraced by Tucker Carlson and other elements of the Trump intellectual right or ideological right as a very, very insightful person. In my view, he's a propagandist. He's an extremely talented propagandist. He's an intelligent guy. You can't, when he tells the story of how the Ukraine war developed, his story there, of course, is that there was a deal to be had with Putin, but the West slapped Putin in the face because of its inherent expansionist tendencies. You can't tell the story the way he tells it unless you are very carefully picking and choosing which parts of the story to tell and which parts not to tell. So it's not by accident that this is happening, or he is very consciously positioning himself. He's an economist by training, but he's positioning himself as an ideologue of the new right. And he's being embraced by people like Tucker Carlson, and it is bad news in the pro-Israel world, because as that tweet, as that quote that I just referenced suggests, he's saying that Israel is dragging the United States into conflicts that are not in its interest.
Yeah. So that is the. A line that is getting more traction in MAGA generally, isn't it?
Yeah, it has. It's what it is. My good friend, our good friend, Tony Badran. You're friends with Tony, are you not?
Yeah.
Our good friend, Tony Badran, wrote something, I think, in Tablet magazine, Tablet, our sponsor, where he said that what's going on here is that actually I'm sorry, I'm stuttering here because I'm trying to remember, it was in Tablet magazine, but was it actually Tony? It might have been someone else. Anyway, the idea was, as Tablet magazine has explained, what Sachs is doing in the Middle East context, and what Tucker Carlson is doing, all of these restraintists, they are repackaging Obama's Iran realignment as MAGA, as the essence of MAGA. So what they are, because just like Sachs is saying about Ukraine, that there's a deal to be had with Putin, which the globalist, expansionist, neoconservative types ignored. There's also a deal to be had with Iran. But Israel, the nefarious Israel, is dragging us into these conflicts that we don't need to be in.
So is that a real possibility? Is Trump on the verge of taking us back to the JCPOA, Mike?
What we have to understand, Gadi, is that the Obama worldview, which is that there's a deal to be had with Iran, and that's the best way to stabilize the Middle East so that we can then pull our troops out. All of this is a reaction to the Iraq War. And the Iraq War, I think there's a consensus in American society, or at least the majority of Americans believe the Iraq War was a mistake. It was an overreach. We got involved. We bit off much more than we could chew. We got involved in a part of the world that we don't really understand in pursuit of goals that were unrealizable. So we have to pull our forces back from the Middle East. The debate then is about how do we best do that? Do we do that at who fills the vacuum, in other words, when we pull back? Do we try to fill the vacuum with the power of our allies, or do we try to cut a deal with our adversaries? And the Obama worldview, the Obama perspective says that Iran is a rational, pragmatic power that we can cut a deal with if we just prove to it that we don't have hostile intentions toward the regime, and that will stabilize the region. All of the arguments that I
just ignore the role of theology and ideology.
All of the arguments that I make about Erdogan's Turkey, they make about Iran. And I think that they are riding the wrong horse. That's the key issue here. But forget about Turkey. The alternative is that we put together an order based on our allies, Israel and Turkey. That's Saudi
Arabia.
And Saudi Arabia. But Israel and Turkey have the military power. But if we're talking about our major allies, Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. Those are the four pillars, the four major pillars. You could add in UAE and if you like, and so on. But in terms of military power and geostrategic heft, we're talking about those four. That idea, the Obama perspective, is not simply Obama's idea, and it's not simply a left-wing idea. When I worked in the Bush White House, that's 2005 to 2007, that idea was alive and well inside the Bush administration. And it primarily resided in the Iraq office in the NSC. One of the major bastions, I guess, of that idea was the Iraq office in the NSC. The idea there was that we're empowering Shiites in Iraq. Those Shiites in Iraq have natural affinities toward Iran. We can work with Iran. Iran wants to see those people succeed. Iran wants stability on its borders. There's a common interest in the U.S. and Iran getting together and stabilizing Iraq. If we just show the Iranians that we don't want to topple them. Also, the same people would note that we toppled that Saddam Hussein was the enemy of Iran, and the Taliban in Afghanistan were the enemy of Iran. And so, if a rational foreign policy would see that Tehran has the same interests in Afghanistan and in Iraq as we do, so there's a deal to be had there. The Obama worldview just simply took that Iraq perspective and then adopted it for the whole region. My point here is it didn't come out of Obama's head. It was resident already in the national security apparatus of the U.S. It remains there, Gadi. Now that Obama's gone and Biden is gone, and now that the whole idea has been destroyed effectively by the fall of Assad, by Israel hollowing out Hezbollah, and so on and so forth, and by the continued hostility of the Iranians toward us, the idea is no longer viable. But it will still be there in one form or another in the national security bureaucracy. And Trump understands this, and he understands the desire of the American public to pull back from the region. So the pro-Israel community, one way or another, is encouraging more involvement of the United States in the region, either directly or indirectly. And so these people like Sachs, who pop up and say, oh no, Israel's the problem, they get a hearing. So Trump is riding two horses simultaneously. He's riding the Mike Huckabee horse, which says, let's give 100% support to Israel, and let's also work with Israel to destroy Iran. And he's riding the Tucker Carlson horse, which says pull back from the Middle East. He knows what he's doing. He'll tweet out both sides. Today he's going to tweet out Jeffrey Sachs. A couple of weeks from now he'll tweet out Mike Huckabee. And what will the actual policy and strategy of the administration will be hashed out in the first couple of months of the after the inauguration.
Still, Mike, I don't want to let you off the hook on the central question. Do you see Trump going for a new JCPOA, a new nuclear deal with Iran?
I'm going to dodge a little bit. Okay, I'm going to dodge a little bit, but I'm going to try to dodge intelligently. I'm not dodging to dodge. The simple answer is maybe. Trump campaigned on peace through strength. The strength part is what the pro-Israel community heard, because they heard the hostility to Iran. So there is a pressure campaign against Iran is coming, and it's going to be a very serious pressure campaign. What we don't know is what the specifically military component of the pressure campaign will be. We don't, and there are two aspects to that. There's what is the American military component of that, and what is the Israeli military component of that. Because Trump might decide, okay, it's a good thing to actually carry out military attacks against Iran's nuclear program, but I don't want American troops involved, so we'll support the Israelis. Or he might say, well, if we're going to support the Israelis, we got to make sure the thing is done right, and we have capabilities the Israelis don't, so let's go in together. Or he might say, let's just raise the threat of military action and then see what we can negotiate with the Iranians. In other words, go for the peace option. He has all of those options available to him. I think the higher probability is that we'll end up with Israel carrying out military attacks in which the U.S. acquiesces, but it's a probability game. I don't know what he's going to do.
All right, so we'll be following that. I began to have a Pavlovian hatnaya, how do you say, conditioning, a Pavlovian conditioning about changing the subject in this program. I've begun to fear it. So, Mike, would you be gracious enough to let me pretend that I control this and move to the next topic?
Gadi, you may move us to a new topic.
Thank you, sire. So, internal Israeli affairs. One you mentioned on the news bulletin, and I have the book. Idan Rol has left the Yesh Atid. There is a future.
We're trying to look at the title. Liftoach ma?
Liftoach et hamoadon. To open the club.
To open the club.
Exactly. So, as you mentioned, he left.
So we can take ecstasy and drink champagne. What are we going to do in the club?
No. It's actually an argument that's worth making. I'll get to it in a minute. But first, he left the party, which is Yair Lapid's. It's called Yesh Atid. There is a future, and people don't know this, but it's registered with the official registrar. Is that word of the parties in Israel as Yesh Atid, headed by Yair Lapid. So that comes with the name. So as you understand, this is not a democratic party. And for the first time, they supposedly had primaries in which Yair Lapid won handily. But Yair Lapid picks his own members of parliament. And Idan Rol, which is a young gay former Likudnik who has served in this party, has decided to leave it and start his own party, which you mentioned with proper irony is called the National Majority, although it is a party of one in the Knesset for now. And of course, Yair Lapid was very angry. But today, Dan Rol published a piece in Haaretz after Lapid said, if you were a decent person, you would resign the parliament because you were voted into the parliament as part of this party. And if you leave it, and if you decide it is no longer your credo, so be an honest enough man, or just be a man, and resign from parliament too. And then Idan Rol replied with a very effective op-ed today in Haaretz of all places, where he said, when you are sworn into the Knesset, you swear to serve the state of Israel, not the party in which you were voted in. And ever since this war started, the only thing that Lapid has been doing is creating larger rifts, attacking the government, and sabotaging the very idea.
So this is actually a more serious thing than I've been giving it credit for here. I've been kind of giggling about it, but this is actually a serious political attack on Lapid, and it will probably harm him.
Yeah, yes, indeed, and it is. I agree that it is ironic that when you're a single member of parliament, you call yourself the national majority. But what Idan Rol has been saying in this book, that has been published as part of his political move, is that there is a consensus in Israel, and that Yair Lapid, he didn't say, in his obsession to replace Netanyahu, is taking the party in a direction that's tearing up a consensus that actually does exist in the population. And what you need to do is open the club. What does he mean by open the club? He said, what happened to Israeli politics, it became a closed club of the same politicians circulating again and again. And this is partly achieved by a few laws. You don't need to get into the whole mechanism, except to say that one of the obstacles to opening the club is the high threshold. If the high threshold in which you need in order to get into the parliament, which is 4 seats out of 120, Israel has a very small parliament. So unless you have 4 seats, you don't pass the threshold. And if you lower it...
I was going to... Sorry. Up until now, I was saying this is a really serious argument, but the Israeli threshold is notoriously low. I mean, in other countries, it's like 10%, 12%.
No, but Israel's system is very radical in many ways. It is completely yachasit. How do you say it?
Relatively.
It is a relative system, or the shita yachasit. And what it means is that you get the whole population voting.
And proportional representation, is that what you want to say?
What did you say?
Proportional representation?
Exactly. So the actually it was lower before. It will create greater diversity and will loosen the blocks which are at loggerheads where Israeli society is not. So whether you think this is the right mechanism, there are a lot of arguments to be made. For instance, there is a big chance that this will create a bigger Arab bloc. The biggest Arab bloc that we had was 16. It's just 10 now, and the Arab bloc is usually adamantly anti-Zionist. So you'll have a bigger portion of anti-Zionism in the parliament. So this is a very complex system, and I would not poo-poo the argument of lowering the threshold, especially that it's part of an argument that seems to be valid. It is true. The soldiers keep complaining and saying, stop fighting, bickering against one another in Tel Aviv while we are fighting Hamas together. So clearly there is, among the elites, and this is an argument that I heard made about the United States as well. The war of ideas is very fierce among elites, while among the general population there is a larger consensus. So this is And Lapid's party is actually ridiculously dictatorial. Lapid controls it completely. And as you know, my opinion is Lapid is a ridiculous character. It is a stain on Israeli politics that this clown ever sat in the seat of the prime minister of Israel. And his understanding of politics, it's like he understands it as a competition of popularity in which he wants to be the most popular kid. And for him, when he stands in a rally in Tel Aviv and shouts, "You want a war, you'll get a war," because in his head, he goes to sleep thinking, "How can I defeat Netanyahu? Not how can I defeat Hamas?" He's just he's extremely childish. You know, I stole your line, Mike, or a variation of it, and I wrote a piece I haven't published yet. Is that a tongue-in-cheek piece in which I said that I have a superpower. I know exactly what Yair Lapid thinks. And this superpower, when he was just a television presenter, was completely redundant. I just know, while I was cutting my salad, I would know what Lapid thinks, but I was not interested myself. But now it is interesting, and I'm telling you that he is deeply apolitical. He doesn't understand politics. I don't know if you saw him when he said that the eruption of war, that the attacks by Hezbollah on Israel at the beginning of the war, they devastated the whole of the north. That's Netanyahu's fault. And when people said to him that, you started by surrendering to Hezbollah in the maritime border agreement in which you gave them everything for nothing. And he stood at the border and he said, that's a ridiculous argument. That thing that I did is far, far away. It's in the sea. And here it's on land. So this is the guy that you have, and leading like the Pied Piper, leading 22 sheep and Idan Rol. And the fact that Idan Rol said, wait a minute, I'm not going after this war, this fomenter of internal civil war, Yair Lapid, I'm not going with him. That creates pressure on everybody else in Yair Lapid's camp, because once you have one deserter, then other people are thinking.
But also, it comes with a serious argument. I was with him in your description of his argument about there being a consensus in Israel despite all of the party division. That's always been very striking to me, that there's on a lot of the major issues, there's a national consensus that doesn't get recognized by the press and by a lot of foreign observers. The idea that the way to get around this, to improve this, is by creating more parties, though, seems to me to be a little crazy. But that we don't need to worry about that. Let's move on to the non-salacious details that you tantalized us with at the beginning of the podcast.
Great, let's do that. There is a major political battle, which is a rearguard action of the lost cause. That sounds very Southern. The lost cause of judicial reform. And Yariv Levin, who was completely defeated, sadly, in his attempt to democratize the Israeli system by reducing the complete dominance of a non-elected Supreme Court, where the judges have veto power over their own nominations, creating basically a court that is closer to the Meretz left-wing party, which did not pass the 4 seats threshold to this parliament. So you have a radical Supreme Court which has managed to subdue the other branches of government. And then there's a very radical judge therein, and his name is Yitzhak Amit. Now, traditionally, the chief of the Supreme Court, as we call it, the president here of the Supreme Court, is appointed by a system called the seniority system, which is exactly as it sounds. The most senior judge, the one serving the longest time on the court, becomes the president, and Yitzhak Amit is next in line. But Yitzhak Amit, even for the court, is a very radical progressive. He has pronounced in one of those, there are many NGOs that are appealing to the court to improve the condition of Gaza civilians, and even more irritatingly, submitting appeals in the name of the Nukhba terrorists who committed the October 7 atrocity. And Yitzhak Amit infamously said to these radical leftist anti-Israeli organizations, this court is putting itself at your service. So people are and also extreme judicial hubris, which puts Aaron Barak to shame. There's nothing like this. There's no John Marshall combined with Errol Warren in the United States would have been 10% of Barak, and apparently Barak is 50% of Amit. Barak was called, I think it was by Judge Burke or possibly Judge Posner. He was called a judicial buccaneer. So these people are very extreme activists. They want to legislate from the bench. They want to control policy from the bench. And Yitzhak Amit is at the radical end of this. And so Yariv Levin tried to filibuster, if that's the word, for not for speeches, but for bureaucratic maneuvers, and also tried to throw out the seniority system. And then the Supreme Court moved to impose a vote on the committee which Yariv Levin chairs. So when I said that the Supreme Court in Israel
impose a vote that would then allow the judges to be appointed
in the committee that appoints judges. Now, if you want to understand how intrusive the court is, this is separation of the branches of government. This is not within the court's authority to dictate to a minister that he has to gather the committee for a meeting and then to dictate the agenda, because he after they forced him to.
So this demonstrates your point about a juristocracy. So if Yariv Levin has the authority to carry out these parliamentary maneuvers, but then the court comes in and says you can't do that. You have to let us appoint ourselves.
Yeah, it's exactly. So this guy is pushing to appoint himself, and he's intervening. This is outrageous. They also did it in the parliament. They think they can force the Speaker of the House to change the agenda and to change the agenda to the dictates of the court. So they did it with Yariv Levin. It's his committee. It's his authority to convene it. No, they convened it. They forced him to convene it. And then they forced the agenda of a vote. And of course, he was outraged. So the battle seemed to have been won by the Supreme Court. And Amit was about to basically put the crown on his own head. But then came an expose by a very brave and non-ideological, it's worth following him, Mike, Netael Bendel, one of the best.
Never heard of him. Where does he write?
He now writes for Yediot Achronot. They threw him out of Haaretz for not towing the party line, I guess, as they do in Haaretz. And they're probably going to have problems with him in Yediot because the Israeli media is all one party. And so it stands against judicial reform and for whatever power the court grabs. But they let him publish this amazing expose in which it turned out that there is a legal procedure against Yitzhak Amit in the Tel Aviv municipality, and they press charges. And while this is going on, Yitzhak Amit is sitting as a judge in cases where the municipality of Tel Aviv is one of the parties.
So we have a conflict of interest. So the juicy incriminating information is that he has been involved in a huge conflict of interest.
Exactly. So, but the story has just started. Apparently, the Tel Aviv municipality at one point withdrew the charges. Now there are conflicting versions of why they withdrew the charges. So the Tel Aviv municipality is saying we withdrew the charges because pressing charges against a judge is just way too complicated, and it takes it takes the authority of the Attorney General of Israel in order to approve that, and we gave it up.
What are the charges? What were the charges?
The charges had to do with an apartment that he has, and there is a system in Tel Aviv where you can appeal for great benefits if you agree to have your building refurbished and apartments added to it. So this is something involving financial interest. So there's one version, according to the Tel Aviv municipality, who said that they withdrew the charges because of bureaucratic considerations. And Yitzhak Amit himself had another version in which he said, no, you don't need the attorney general in order to press these charges, because the charges have to do with a minor fine, and so the issue is not important. So there are conflicting versions. It's only getting worse. And the last juicy detail is that all this in this whole affair and the whole judicial proceedings, Amit went by his, it's not a maiden name, right? It's by his former name, which is Goldfriend. So it doesn't.
Oh, in order to keep his name out of the media, he uses
that's a speculation, but it seems. But the fact is that he is using his old name in that proceeding. And so what I want to show you, Mike, is one of the best cartoonists in Israel. His name is Or Reichert, and he's a, humor has moved to the right. The left has just lost it in everything, and the right has now the intellectual advantage, while the left is sinking in
same thing here.
Identity politics. And now, like the Babylon Bee, it's the funnier things are happening on the right. So
the Babylon Bee, an evangelical publication. The most ironic people in America today are evangelicals. Who would have thought? It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so let me pick that, just dig it up and show you what it looks like. Do you see this? So if you're listening to us on audio, this is a Mickey take of the famous poster of The Godfather. It's with the same letters, but it's a picture of Judge Amit, and the writing in the same font says The Goldfriend instead of The Godfather.
Instead of The Godfather, The Goldfriend.
And so the question now,
and then underneath it says everything stays in the family.
Exactly. It remains a question whether or not the appointment of Amit to the presidency of the Supreme Court will nevertheless sail through, because these people the hubris is just so huge, and they're feeling that they're controlling all the levers of power, including the media. And it now seems that they will be able to do it. But I'm telling you, if they do, you will have a stained president of the Supreme Court, way outside the consensus of Israeli society, who also put the crown on his own head. Let me remind you that this did not work out very well for Napoleon, who was more powerful and also had an army. So it is not clear that the Supreme Court will be able to get away from this. And now we will move to another topic, because I can't think of anything that you might be saying about Judge Amit, unless, of course, you'll surprise me once again.
I will not.
So let's move on to the dumb mistake.
My dumb mistake is really easy. It's in his speech, his foreign policy speech. President Biden took credit for the weakening of Iran in the region, and
you were all wrong about the realignment.
Yeah, I was
all along.
Which I just thought it was amazing because the Biden administration, we know, put Israel in a bear hug from October 7th on, and even before that, of course. And it was protecting its relationship with Iran, did everything it could to keep the war from weakening Iran. My favorite line, I've said this several times here. My favorite line of the entire war is when the Minister of Defense, Gallant, called up Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, and said, "We just killed Nasrallah," and Austin said, "You did what?" Anyway, so it's ridiculous, of course, but okay, this is politics. You have one, Gadi?
I have one. It's actually a piece of nostalgia that I ran into. It has to do with your favorite journalists. Amit Segal, which you can sometimes read in the Wall Street Journal now in the opinion pages. And he's clearly probably Israel's most talented journalist. And he's hanging on in a very lefty media outlet, which is the major news organization in Israel, Hadjot 12, Channel 12 News. And everybody is there on the left, and he's the token right winger, although he's so effective that they keep getting irritated. So sometimes he balances the whole thing himself. And I just ran into this piece that he interviewed Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak is becoming more and more controversial in Israel for fomenting the chaos of the anti-government protest and demanding civil disobedience and planning all kinds of coups, and then explaining that he will be called to duty when enough corpses float in the Yarkon River. And he emphasized corpses of Jews, not of others. And so he's not very well liked outside the circles of the protest. And he's also infamously connected to Jeffrey Epstein. And he usually doesn't come to any interview unless he gets an agreement that he would not be asked about that. And there's
Epstein.
It's
Epstein,
you what?
I think we say Epstein. Doesn't matter anyway.
Epstein, okay, Epstein. And so there's a famous picture of him with a scarf over his face, where he was caught by the Daily Mirror, I think, entering Epstein's mansion while trying to cover his face. So I ran into this interview that it's an old one. I don't know how many months ago that Amit Segal did with him. And Amit Segal got around the question like this. He said, you keep getting asked about Jeffrey Epstein, about your involvement in all that. And instead of asking, and the Wexner Foundation, which gave you money, and you never disclosed what the money was for. You said this was for some research, but you never submitted or you never disclosed what the research was. So instead of going into all this, I'll only ask you one question, Amit said. You went into Jeffrey Epstein's mansion with a scarf over your face. You later said that this was because it was a cold day. So here's my question. Why did you not put on gloves? So I'm guessing that there was an agreement behind the scene what Amit can ask and not ask, and he came up with this question about the gloves that was not mentioned in the contract.
How did Barak answer?
The video is cut after that.
Okay.
He's not good with these things. He becomes very aggressive when pushed in interviews. And famously, he told one interviewer, not a hostile one, way back, I think before all the Epstein things, he kept shushing the interviewers and turning to the camera and he's saying, "I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the public." and that's very offensive it's even more offensive than when a host is trying to go to the next segment and the other host is not letting him. Mike, why don't we go to the next segment?
So we'll do that. A lot of people in the next segment is the readers
comments.
A lot of people were on my side, Gadi, and they were worried that we were fighting about this going to segment issue, because I think we got some new people who haven't been with us, and they didn't understand that in the past I've always made it hard for you, and so a number of people said, please don't fight. I don't like to see you fight. But we even had some people, Gadi, who said, these are my favorite people, of course. They said, one said, I feel like Gadi doesn't appreciate your jokes, Mike, and then doesn't appreciate your jokes enough. And then another person said that they wish that you would let me talk more. I found this one particularly funny because early on when we started this podcast, of course, people always accused me of interrupting you. But anyway, I want to reassure everyone that all feelings are good between me and Gadi, and all of this talk about the fighting about moving from segment to segment is purely horsing around. We're horsing around.
You know that this is because you are an honorary Israeli. I find that with Americans, disagreement is touchy. it can get they're uncomfortable about it. There was actually a professor in my department who challenged the whole discipline of linguistic communications, in which the dominant theory was that the goal of conversation is agreement. And she found out that the goal of American conversation is agreement. It's not like that in Israel at all.
Right.
So we can disagree. We sometimes even fiercely disagree. And you and Dan disagreed deeply about in a former episode about Turkey, and this is not in any way an obstruction to friendship. That's how it is in Israel.
That's how it used to be.
That's how it used to be, right? Right. We learned from the United States that when there's disagreement now, there is no communication. That's a sad thing. And so this is why we have Idan Rol now creating the national majority.
I'll give you one last comment here. Misty-R1K says your channel will grow to 100,000 at least within 4 to 6 months, which is a reminder to everyone to please subscribe, like us, and leave a comment, even if it is an angry comment. She also says, I'm assuming Misty is a lady, she says, Carolyn Glick mentioned you in her program, and CBN also mentioned you. I think they mentioned Mike. We should all help you build your channel since people need sources where they can find the truth. Yes, help us build our channel. I hope you're right, Misty-R1K. I hope we go to 100,000. We deserve it, absolutely, because we are as sane as possible under the circumstances. But help us game the algorithm. Do as I said. Like us, please, if you do like us. Actually, like us even if you don't like us.
Mike, I'm going to pass the torch to you, and you can have the sagir. How do you say that in English? You can have the final. You can close the program.
The closing, I guess. I don't know what it is.
Okay. I don't know.
How do I? I don't know what we say in the closing. I never do it. You do it.
You never listen to what I say?
No, I shut down.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be here with you next Tuesday. And sometimes we are, and sometimes we aren't. Sometimes we're on a Wednesday, but I don't say that when I close the show.
That was really easy. Actually, I could have done that.
It's more complicated than you think. You want to try?
No, it's okay. Next time.
Okay. So thank you for being with us, and we'll be here next Tuesday or Wednesday.